I actually learned to mask my anxiety by appearing to be very calm, whereas inside I was in a pretty stressed up state. And I know that my brain is a ping pong ball. I'm often going from one topic to the next, and it really was a recurring theme.
Welcome to the Focus and Chill podcast, where we discuss unconventional productivity tactics designed for neurospicy people. I interview neurodivergent guests who've figured out secrets for getting a ton of amazing work done without burning out. I'm your host, Jeremy Nagel. I'm an ADHD software developer turned startup founder and PhD candidate. I built FocusBear to help with my own productivity and burnout challenges. Welcome to episode number 129 of the Focus and Chill podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dilpreet Buxi today. Dilpreet is the CEO and co-founder of Philia Labs, a Melbourne-based startup using wearable tech and biomedical engineering to improve mental health outcomes, especially for neurodivergent folks. With a PhD in electrical engineering from Monash and deep R&D experience across Europe and Australia, he's developed patented technologies for cuffless blood pressure and heart rate monitoring. His current mission is to make stress measurable and manageable. Through real-time data and predictive algorithms, Dilpreet and his team at Philia Labs are empowering autistic individuals, people with anxiety, and their support networks to take proactive steps before things spiral. Welcome to the show, Dilpreet.
Thank you, Jeremy. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to speak with you. We've had a few email exchanges. I'm personally very excited about the technology at Philia Labs, and also keen to hear about your own personal story. Could you tell us about when you noticed times that you weren't neurotypical?
Probably the key thing is I got a birthday card when I was 17 from my classmates, and it was signed by about 20 odd classmates, and about 5 or 6 of them actually wrote, "Hey buddy, love you, don't be a stress freak, and take life easy." And that actually got me thinking that how come I'm always getting more stressed up than everybody else? And the other anecdote is my teachers often used to say that I'm easily distracted, and yet others would say that I'm always obsessed about certain things. This happened later on in my life, and as I suspect you're thinking, this guy is probably alternate, switching between hyper-focused and non-focused state. I'm still not sure so I know that I have an elevated stress response, and given the work that we've done at Philia Labs, we know that stress actually exists in the body. It's not just in the mind. And we'll go into the science a little bit afterwards. Most of my understanding of what neurodivergence and being neurotypical actually came during Philia Labs, but it helped me connect the dots in my teenage years and my adulthood, where I was constantly in anxiety. And then I actually learned to mask my anxiety by appearing to be very calm, whereas inside I was in a pretty stressed up state. And I know that my brain is a ping pong ball. I'm often going from one topic to the next. And it really was a recurring theme in my PhD, where most of my peers, they were able to focus on one subject area within the PhD. I always tended to go broad because for me, if I was not able to connect the dots, I would go nuts. And so, the PhD it was a good outcome. It was a system design of a blood pressure monitor, which looked at clinical, technical, and to some extent, user acceptability as well, rather than just coming up with a technical solution. So I felt that the neurotypical, neurodivergent traits that I might have are either being hyper-focused, often being in a state of anxiety when certain things happen, because I can feel that my body is wired very differently, and it's taken a lot of years of yoga to somewhat temper that. Yeah, that's my story in a bit.
Yeah, I can relate to the stress that, especially at that time. And it's surprising that other people wouldn't have felt stress. Maybe I'm just projecting, but it feels like at 17 years of age, that is a time where you've got high stakes exams and It's a time where there's a lot of social challenges as well. Is it something you said that it has gotten better through yoga and things like that? Is it something that I guess has always been with you? And what do you think you were getting stressed out about specifically?
Fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, fear of not delivering. I think those were the key things. But if we look at stress, there are models to describe what stress actually means for a person. One of the models that one of our advisors invented was there is exposure to stressors. There is the appraisal of the different stressors, and then there's the response to them. And the response generally can be differentiated between psychological, behavioral, and even physiological. And if we look at Robert Sapolsky's book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, oftentimes it's really the appraisal to stressors that matters, but the exposure matters as well. So I believe your question was, how have I actually gotten better at stress management? A large part is due to tempering it is really due to doing things that help you recover physiologically from the stressor. And some of the inner work has been on appraising stressors differently. So instead of catastrophizing, I tend to strongly consider alternative views of why something happened or what it actually means.
I'm going to have to read that book. That's fascinating. And it sounds like a good way to approach it. Just going to interrupt the episode a little bit. There's some background noise that I'm finding a little bit distracting. It sounds like someone is clicking their mouse, possibly.
Yeah, that's my partner, but I'll go to the next room.
Okay, that would be great. All right. So there's been, I guess, a process of self-identification along the way as well, that you've looked back on these memories and you've identified that you respond a bit differently to other people. You said to me privately that you identify as neurodivergent. Could you talk about what led to that identification and what has changed also since coming to that point?
That's a really good question, Jeremy. So this time last year, my co-founder and I made a strategic pivot to support the autistic community with our product. And as a natural start, you start to read up about what autism is and what it means for autistic people, autistic families, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that really stood out was that is autistic people's nervous systems are wired differently. So the way the external world is perceived, the way they respond, and even the way the autistic community is able to sense things like hunger and thirst and stress, it's very different. And my partner is actually a behavioral scientist, and her response is always that when you read up more about certain conditions, it's very natural to have questions about your own life. And she actually challenged my thought process about whether I am truly neurodivergent or not. But then when I thought about my own life, I tried to become a specialist in my previous jobs, and it was really hard because I was continuously, instead of being able to dive and focus on one single topic, my attention was going all over the place until I saw the bigger picture. I think my ability to concentrate solely on one item, it's always been impossible. And my brain wanders all over the place until I see the dots. And then it's just easier to then zoom in to one particular topic. So when we read about the way autism manifests itself, and alongside there was ADHD, and I heard a lot of other people saying that they struggle either with hyperfocus or cannot focus, I thought to myself, okay, there might be something going on in my own history. And interestingly, one of my team members has an ADHD diagnosis. And he came to us, Alex, my co-founder and myself, and they talked about their newfound diagnosis and what support they need. And then we went through that chapter and they were pretty happy with whatever was agreed. But then I talked to my colleague, the one who came to us, and I said, hey, even I've struggled with these things in my life, like, hyperfocus, anxiety, and even just not being able to sit still while you're working. And my colleague says, yeah, I've noticed these things in you, and you're probably ADHD. You probably have some ADHD traits. Yeah. So look, in a nutshell, that's been a bit of about my journey, and I'll probably get a diagnosis at some point, just for my own sake. But I got to talk about Alex as well. He has an autistic brother, and his brother requires more support than others. And Alex is about 5'4", and his brother is 6'1". And so imagine days where you have a nonverbal brother and they're not doing too well on a particular day and they have a meltdown and they're really strong. It takes him and his two parents who are in their late 60s now to actually bring their brother back into a more rest and digest state. And so for us, the mission to help with anxiety and meltdowns, it's pretty personal.
Yeah, understandable. What was the inspiration before the pivot to autism? Was Philia Labs a general stress management system?
We were actually trying to provide the mining industry analytics on mental health decline for shift workers. That there is definitely a big mental health issue along with psychosocial safety problems in that market, but the market's not ready yet. And so it was really coincidence that we got the opportunity to work with a therapist who's autistic herself. And she developed a somatic therapy to bring autistic clients more into rest and digest mode. So while we were trying to penetrate the mining industry, we were working with her to demonstrate that apart from questionnaires and interviews, there are other ways to objectively measure the body's response to stress, and therefore show that certain interventions are working and certain interventions are not. We did that study. She then graciously gave us the chance to speak to caregivers and to some extent the adults who were involved in the study. And when we talked to them, yeah, let's just say we were almost in tears at hearing what the parents and the adults go through. We also faced a moment where we had to choose to make a pivot or wind down the company. And we felt, and Alex said to me, hey, my brother's autistic. I want to do this. And for me, the driver has always been that we need to be able to measure stress more objectively so that we can enable better health interventions, be it mental health or stress management or even physical health. Autism aligns very well with us personally, but hearing the stories of the caregivers, we said, hey, we have got to do this. We've got to give this a crack.
Is it designed then more for, say, level 3 autism when you're talking more about caregivers versus people with lived experience themselves?
Honestly, it's for everyone. We've built the underlying algorithms, but the product itself, which would be a mobile app, adults have a different set of needs. So we've talked to several groups within the autistic community. The first one is adults, and so I don't like the term ASD, and I also don't like the levels of support. I think they're not so binary, but we've talked to adults who are quote unquote more independent than others. We've also talked to caregivers, and the needs of each group are very different. But there's also some common things, such as being able to manage emotional dysregulation. That's a key one. And I identify very much with that because I have to work really hard to detect and manage dysregulation when it happens. So that's a key need, whereas where adults would really like a way to not only predict it, but also get help in preventing it, if possible, whether it's through self exercises like biofeedback and deep breathing, etc. But also, adults have said they would like to be able to annotate events and what they perceive about them, and then see what the impact is on their sleep and stress patterns. In other words, what promotes lower stress and better sleep, and what actually triggers poor sleep and stress.
Yeah, I can certainly attest that is of interest to me personally. And I originally found out about the Philia Labs product when I saw it in a startup accelerator. I was asked to judge, and I gave you guys really good marks because it's something that I've actually tried to purchase products like this. I was interested in the Prana wearable, originally the Spire, which was a way of tracking breathing and identifying stress through that method. And then the Prana was a similar approach where you wear a belt and it detects when you shift from diaphragmatic breathing to chest breathing, which might signal anxiety. And neither of those products were really able to nail it. The holy grail here is probably to be able to detect it in real time. You were saying to predict stress. And I think for me, it's quite an acute window that it has. I don't really have full-on meltdowns, but I definitely have times where I become very passive aggressive. And I don't like that about myself. I see that it has negative impacts on my team when it involves something at work, and on my wife when it's stress at home. And so something that is able to signal to me and say, hey, Jeremy, you need to go for a walk around the block would be amazing. So really support what you're doing. And
yeah,
when you were talking about being able to annotate events, I guess I've seen apps like that previously. I had an app that I set up to ask me to rate my mood every 15 minutes, and then it would allow me to annotate what caused a drop in mood. So if I went from an 8 to a 4, then I could put someone's name down, and then I can basically then look at my sleep data as well and see that it's because of Bob. Bob destroyed my sleep. I stopped using it though because it felt quite burdensome to do that type of data entry. Have you got a plan on how you'll be able to do that in terms of doing the annotation without it being annoying and a lot of hard work?
Yeah, I agree that asking every 15 minutes, it's a nice scientific concept, but it's not really translatable into a product. The way we are currently doing we ask on a nightly basis, or basically in the morning when a person wakes up. We ask for some 3 or 4 subjective parameters, which take about 30 seconds to complete. How do you rate your sleep, and what was your mood like last night and today morning? Definitely there are better ways to ask these questions, and we are working on it. But one of the ways we are approaching annotation is ask less often. And the types of questions that you ask matter as to how often you can ask them. So the fundamental basis that we use is to take existing clinical questionnaires, such as the GAD-7 or the perceived stress score, and as and when, and we will tailor some of these to make it more applicable to understanding the relationship between events and response. In other words, how you design a questionnaire determines how often you ask it, and that kind of how often you ask and how much data, physiological data you use to identify potential triggers, that's basically the secret sauce. The other thing that I would say is this: stress is a very nebulous term, and we really like the 2019 publication by Alyssa Apel and Alexandra Crosswell and others, because they basically took the trouble to define what kind of stresses we are talking about from a psychological construct. So there's acute stress, which is what you talk about, where suddenly your mood or your physiological response might move from minute to minute. There's also chronic stress, where, in their publication, they define it as anything that's been causing you issues over the last 6 months repeatedly. Chronic stress in terms of physiology also means that the body's organs start to adapt to sympathetic overdrive and, in other words, perpetually elevated fight or flight activity, right? It means that your cortisol levels are super high and you actually start to lose sleep, etc. So for us, the second part of the secret sauce is really how we measure chronic and acute stress. Chronic stress, we believe, can be measured. You don't have to measure it 24/7. There are certain parts of the day where measuring physiological data makes a lot of sense to estimating whether a person is at risk of fatigue or burnout, autistic burnout, or emotional dysregulation. So that means that there's less burden on wearing your wearable 24/7.
Mm. And if you figured out a way to distinguish between the effects of, say, acute exercise and other things that might elevate physiological signals and emulate stress, that'd be quite different.
Yeah, it depends on when you measure and for how long. Generally, if you're recovering from exercise, you will have both elevated fight or flight as well as rest and digest activity, right? Both are actually, if you think of your body's stress response, it's got the accelerator, which is the fight or flight, and the brake, which is the rest and digest. So interestingly, when people exercise, sure, you've got more fight or flight activity, but when you're recovering from it, you're pressing on the brake, but to some extent, you're actually pressing on the accelerator as well. Now, in lab studies, that's been classified as a healthy response. And I got to say, the limitation of heart rate variability is that it is really a well-validated measure of the brake activity. It does not measure the accelerator activity. In other words, you need to measure both.
Mm.
And that's how we're different, partly. And so if you talk about a person who's suffering from chronic stress, when they are sleeping, their accelerator should really let go. And there are certain patterns to how much the accelerator is being let go and when it's being pressed on, let's say during your REM sleep phase. The way we approach it is to measure both sides of both the brake and the accelerator, particularly during certain phases of sleep, to be able to discriminate between somebody who's recovered from the day and somebody who's really at full anxiety, either due to sensory issues or due to the previous day's stresses or the anxiety about the next day's stresses.
That makes
Does that answer your question though? Or?
Yeah, and I can see how that would be more accurate because I've got a Samsung smartwatch and the stress measurement is very inaccurate there, that it tends to just basically say I'm stressed when I've gone for a run, which isn't helpful at all. And I see how your approach would be better.
Exactly. We feel that there's the fundamental definitions of what momentary stress versus chronic stress. It is on Philia Labs really to spread the word and educate stakeholders about what these definitions are and why they should be used rather than a simple stress score on your smartwatch. And it's no disrespect meant to the current wearables companies, but just doesn't cut it for the autistic community.
Mm. And for anyone, I imagine, because there'd be a lot of people who'd like to understand stress better. On the other end of the
100%.
spectrum, I'm curious about what you personally do to lower your own stress levels. You talked about yoga before. Can you tell the audience a bit more about the practices that you do?
Yeah. So let's start with the science, if that's okay.
Okay.
You cannot outthink your way from a stressful situation because the body's ability to go into rest and digest mode. Let's talk about the vagus nerve, which is the main nerve, which is responsible for rest and stimulating the body to undergo rest and digest activity. 80% of the traffic in the vagus nerve goes from the body to the brain. And 20% goes in the other way, which is why if you're really stressed out, going for exercise actually triggers the rest of it. It's in the body, and that 80% of the traffic then stimulates the rest. It goes towards the brain, which triggers the rest of the hormonal processes to go into rest and digest state. This is why rumination doesn't help. And this is why practices that stimulate the vagus nerve are of utmost importance, not just for the community, but also for the rest of the world. Yoga is really good because a lot of the poses will stimulate the spine and to some extent the vagus nerve. And if, as an example, if you are sitting on the floor and your feet are like this, and if you're moving your legs the way I'm moving my arms, that's a butterfly pose. That directly stimulates the vagus nerve closer to your hip. If I got my anatomy right. So yoga is one. Deep breathing is another well-known technique that goes alongside yoga, and that definitely stimulates more mindfulness, etc., to bring your heart rate down and stimulate your vagus nerve through what's known as respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Running is absolutely crucial because it does trigger movement. Really helps, and I cannot explain the science in a bit more detail, unfortunately, but for me, movement really helps. I tend to get really obsessed about things, so I also, when I actually have a very negative pattern of thought, then I immediately switch to statements that really help me, that prevent more destructive thinking patterns. That's what I do.
Nice. It's a good arsenal of techniques there. And that was about lowering stress. How about improving productivity? What tactics do you find help you to optimize productivity?
Oh, it's a really tough one. I think for me, just given how my brain works, seeing the bigger picture really helps because it helps me prioritize what I should be doing today, right now. I am awful at keeping to-do lists, even though I have a productivity app called Nosby, which lists down my tasks for the day. I still fail to have a ritual in the morning where I actually look at what I need to do that day and use it. So I have to admit, I'm actually awful at very systematic productivity. But what works for me is knowing what the bigger picture is, what absolutely needs to be done, and what we need to say no to. I think that helps me decide what needs to get done. And the other thing that helps my own productivity as CEO is knowing what is delegating and being very clear to my team as to what needs to be done and by when, and sometimes why. And then just letting them get on with it so that I can free up my own time to do what I need to do.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And so one of the meta strategies is to run your own business. So you can have people to delegate to and you have control over the bigger picture. I think sometimes it's harder when you're working for someone else and you don't necessarily agree with the overall direction. It can make it hard to feel aligned.
It happens in my line of work as well, especially when external stakeholders don't, when external events react unfavorably. I think, and we are a small team, right? So if you don't have somebody to give the work to, you have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
If I have to do it myself, I think we are so lucky right now that there's ChatGPT based tools. So one of the things I'm not good at is doing a sanity check, scanning my own emails, making sure that sentences are complete. That what I wanted to say is really said. I use ChatGPT a lot to do sanity checks about what I'm trying to communicate. That helps my productivity a lot. And I know that there is the argument, sometimes ChatGPT tells you what you want to hear. The way we try to avoid that is we tell it strictly to use a certain set of materials that we trust. For example, user personas or market studies. We tell it to only include or exclude certain things. And the second thing I do is actually tell it, hey, are you just telling me what I want to hear? Can you be a devil's advocate and give me a counter argument? And
Mm,
that helps me. Luckily, my analytical abilities are quite strong. So I'm able to see both sides of the picture. And more often than not, it helps me make better decisions, which lead to better productivity.
definitely. I like that. We've had some good tips here about managing stress and improving productivity, and we're going to now take a break to let it all sink in. The Focus and Chill podcast is brought to you by Focus Bear, a focus enhancement app for ADHDers. Staying on top of tasks is easier than ever with Focus Bear's new To-Dos feature. Record a voice note describing what you need to do, and Focus Bear's AI will turn it into a structured set of subtasks and automatically prioritize it for you. You can also take a photo of a paper to-do list, and the AI will work its magic. I'd love for you to try it. You can jump onto focusbear.io or just Google Focus Bear and try it out. Let me know what you think. We've had our break. The ideas have been sinking in, and now I'm keen to hear about how you incorporate them into your morning routine. What do your mornings look like?
So I get up. Firstly, I travel a lot, and it's because I've been relocating the company to Singapore, and I've been in a long distance relationship with my partner from Europe. So my mornings, depending on whether I'm in Europe or in Australia, my mornings vary. If it's in Australia or Singapore, I will get up, I will walk around, stretch, and repeat certain statements of gratitude to myself. Extremely crucial when, as a founder, you're overcoming a lot of challenges, but it's for anyone. Then I tend to get some movement in, whether it's a short walk or a short run. In Europe, I tend to do a bit of yoga in the morning and then straight away go to a couple of meetings with my co-founder, given the 8-hour time difference.
Nice. Sounds like a good way to start the day, and glad you're able to do it regardless of what time zone you're in. How about when you're winding down for sleep?
That's really important because a good night's sleep will promote more rest and digest activity, which sets the body up for the next day. I try more often than not to stop work a couple of hours before I sleep. Not always successful, but what my partner and I, thanks to my partner, we will do about 25 minutes of yoga before we sleep and some meditation involved. That definitely accelerates the body's ability to wind down. I also will reflect on things that I'm grateful for during the day so that I can reset my appraisal of stressors. That definitely calms me down to get a better night's sleep. And I've started putting my phone in the next room so that, when I wake up after a few hours, I don't go towards checking my emails. Not always successful, but it's way better than keeping it next to you.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And then the other advantage of that I've found is then I actually get up when the alarm goes off because it's not within grabbing distance.
It makes all the world of difference in having better sleep hygiene.
Well, it's been really good chatting with you about your own personal practices and also about Philia Labs. If people would like to find out more about Philia Labs or would like to connect with you, where's the best place to find you online?
So connecting with me and Alex would be on LinkedIn. We also have a LinkedIn page and we have a website. It's solutions.philialabs.com.au. That's about the product for the autistic community. That's a good place to know what the product is and does. And FYI, we are revamping it currently, given what we've learned about the autistic community, which is an ongoing process. So those are the two ways. Yeah.
Wonderful. Do you have any final words or asks for the audience?
That's stress begins in the body. And if you're struggling with interoception or with communicating your needs, to health professionals, especially with poor sleep or stress-related stuff, we'd invite you to trial our product. We have been offering a 30-day free trial to autistic consumers and caregivers. Come
In
to our
Australia,
website.
that is.
In Australia, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you for that reminder. I'd encourage you to come to our site and check it out.
I agree. Yeah, it's a really worthwhile technology, and I'm planning to try it out myself in the future as well. Thanks so much, Dilpreet.
Brilliant.
We'll wrap the show with that.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Focus and Chill podcast. To listen to other episodes, jump onto podcast.focusbear.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or you know someone who'd be a good fit, email us at team@focusbear.io. Otherwise, stay focused, stay chilled, and peace out.